Okay, so this video looks at Luma-based Trackmattes. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a very simple setting change here that we make on a layer that allows us to create transparency. And we could do that in a number of ways. We can do it in a way that allows us to create a realistic composite here where we have someone put into a new space where she was not originally filmed. And that is done through the addition of a matte image that is being used in the effect. We can also look at it in action here where we have a very kind of motion graphic use where we have some text that's kind of going a little bit crazy here. It's glitching out before it's revealed. And finally then we are going to look at it being used for a kind of an aesthetic double exposure effect taken from the film or the program series True Detective. So it's kind of a cross between this one and this one. Okay, so I'm showing you different applications of the same simple effect called Trackmatte, and Trackmatte, this particular type of Trackmatte we're using is called Luma Trackmatte. Okay, so if we take this as our starting point, because it's the easiest one to see, we have a number of layers. We have a black and white layer here, which we can consider as our matte. We have a foreground layer, which is her surrounded by grey. That's not transparent. Okay, we need to make that transparent. You'll see that we can click the transparency grid here, nothing happens. And then in the background, we have our backdrop. Okay, so I'm going to set everything back to normal and make everything visible. And back out here, we should be able to see, I'll go back into my composition view, our top layer is our matte image. Beneath that we have our foreground figure, and then beneath that we have our background. So we're going to use the top layer as a control to create transparency for the image directly beneath it, and we do that by a thing called a track matte. Trackmattes are one of your layer controls here. If you need to bring it up, you click toggle switches and modes, and that allows you to see your track matte drop down. Now, the way track mattes always work is that the image that you want to use as a control to create the transparency is on top of the image that you want to remain visible. But the track matte setting is applied to the second one here, so that the one that we want to remain visible. So we click on track matte and we go down to our Luma settings. Because it's black and white, it has to do with brightness only, and we select one of these two. Now when it's the white part of the image that you want to make your image visible, such as the figure, the outline of the figure, you select Luma Matte. Okay, and what that does is it creates transparency on her layer so that wherever it was black, it is now transparent and we can see through it down to our base layer. Okay, I'll switch on my transparency grid there. So you can see that she is now has a transparent outline, because wherever it was white, it kept her visible. Wherever it was black, made it invisible. And importantly, because it's a track matte, that will only be applied to the layer that has the track matte applied to it. We can put whatever we want beneath it. Okay. Now, if I were to select Luma inverted, all it would do is flip the black and white image inside out and do the reverse. So now wherever it's white in the control image or our matte image, it becomes transparent, and wherever it was black, it remains opaque or visible. So they both do the same thing, but one is an inverted version of the other. So that brings us to the next one here, glitch. Here we have a piece of text. I'll just turn off the top one here because it's not really required for the effect. What we have is we've got a piece of text here that says glitchtastic. Okay, now if I undo all of these, we'll look at it from the start. Okay, so we have a matte image. In this case, it's an animated matte, traveling matte as it's referred to. It's a video with kind of a VHS glitching out quickly in black and white. So again, same principle, we're taking the white and the black and we're using them to assign transparency and opacity to another layer, the layer directly beneath it, in this case our text layer. So if I select the text layer to take Trackmatte information, Luma, and either one will do really, click on that and you'll see that it now applies that. You'll see that it is actually creating transparency. Okay, so wherever it was white in our glitchy video, it allows the text to show through. Wherever it is not, the opposite will happen. Okay, and when we have that in front of a white background, you'll see that it kind of looks like it's kind of melting it, glitching it into the background. Okay, so all I've done is I've used my text as my base layer and taken my Trackmatte information from the VHS in the exact same way as I did previously. Now, the last piece of text simply is there to kind of, for the effect to kind of land on readable text. Okay, so that's the goal. It's just to glitch it in and then have it readable on screen. So again, that's a very straightforward version of it as well. Now, the last one here is a little bit more complicated, so it'll probably take a little bit more time. So I'm going to go to a video, or sorry, to the finished product, we'll say, and then I'll build it up from scratch. Okay, so what we have is we've got him, and we've got another image which we can see coming through, but we can also see that his head kind of disappears as it moves off towards the top of the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it from scratch. So I'll look for Jack CU and I'll create a new composition based on him. Okay, so we're going to, first of all, we're going to make him black and white. So we right click, go up to our effects, we go color correction, and we go hue and saturation. Take the saturation down to 0. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to give it a bit of contrast because it's all very gray. We go to our effects. What I did there is I just went up to the effect panel, clicked in there directly, and it brings me straight to the effects. I go down to color correction, I go to curves, and I give it an S curve, which means contrast. And I can come back and tweak that later as needs be. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the image that I want to be in the background. And that is going to be, let's see, it's in the True Detective folder. It's down here. It is oil field. So I'll bring that down directly beneath it and just scale it up a bit. Right, so again, I have some black and white information here, and I want the black information in this case to reveal the object beneath it, which is our other image. So I go Trackmatte, Luma, inverted matte. Okay, and now that gives me everywhere that it's dark, it shows the oil field. Now what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pull it up a little bit here, and you'll see why in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to leave it there just on his eye line. So for this to work, I need to have a little bit of his image still remaining visible down here where we don't see any effect. So we just want to see the oil field kind of coming in roughly midway up his face. So to do that, I can do a couple of things, but the most simple thing would probably be to bring him in again and quickly go through those effects one more time. In this case, it was color correction, hue saturation, bring that down, and then color correction, curves, get back in that contrast. This time I want it to be a little bit lighter. Okay, so what we're looking to do now is we're looking to make his face pretty much visible at the bottom and then progressively disappear as we get up towards the top of his head. So to do that, I'm going to use a track matte, but I'm going to do it in a different way. I'm going to apply a gradient ramp for my track matte. Now what that means is that I need to have a solid layer, which I'll call gradient. That could be any color, doesn't matter. Click OK and leave it sitting up there in the top. Now the only reason I need a solid for this to work is that I need a layer to apply a black and white gradient that I'm going to use as my track mat. So I go up to my effects and presets, type in gradient, and you'll find gradient ramp there. When I drag that down, we get black and white. Okay, so what I can do now is I can apply this image as a track mat for the top version of him. And I'll go alpha, let's see, inverted, no, alpha Luma-matte gradient, not inverted. And you'll see now that we get a kind of a fade down. Now, the reason for that is because I have, remember, black going to white as a gradient, so it's becoming progressively opaque, it's see-through, and it's getting more visible. And I can control how that happens by going up to my gradient ramp and selecting it and clicking on the start of ramp, and I can get the gradient to start around here, and I can get the end of the ramp about here. So if I switch on my background layer again, you'll see that I now get the composite effect of him being visible and the oil stacks starting to become visible up here. Now you can kind of see the bottom of the image there, which isn't what we want. So we go back up to the gradient and we stop the gradient about here. Okay. Now remember, this is what we're looking at. This is just a black to white image, and we're using it for its Luma values on him. Now from here on in, it's all about kind of fine-tuning things. So in the case of the oil field, I want to give it a bit of contrast. So I right-click, I go to my effects, color correction, curves, and again, a bit of contrast, drag that down there. Now I could also give that the same hue and saturation just to keep everything desaturated for now, because I'm going to change that towards the end. Okay, so this is pretty much almost where I want it to be. So the last step here is to do what's called a pre-comp. So what I want to do is I want to be able to change the colors of all of this in one go without having to go into individual layers to do so. So the way that I do that is I select all my layers and I'm going to place them in a composition and leave that composition here on the timeline in place of these layers. And then I'll be able to apply the effects directly to the pre-comp. So I select everything that I want to go into my new composition, I right click and I go pre-compose, and you want to give it a name such as TD for True Detective, colorize, click OK, and now we have a single object, and we can do things like we can go to our effects, we can go color correction, back into hue saturation, and this time I'm going to colorize it to give it a color. And the next thing I'll do, just to finish the whole thing off, is go to my color balance and give it a kind of a jewel tone effect by changing the reds to be a different color. Sorry, the darks to be a different color in the red channel, and maybe take up the green then and highlights. No, we don't want to do that. We're going to take them down as well. So you're just trying to basically get a little bit of variety into the image there. Now, if at this stage you need to go and do another curves, that's fine. If you want to change the brightness, you know, you want to do something like that, you can apply those here as well. Okay. So that is the True Detective double exposure effect using Trackmattes and pre-comping.